Hi, friends. Gene Valentino, and welcome back to another episode here on Gene Valentino's GrassRoots TruthCast. As mentioned before, we have guests from all walks of life, and today's guest is Chris Papst. He's up in Baltimore, renowned award-winning journalist whose Fox television outlet in the Baltimore area, written a very interesting book called The Failure Factory. We're going to talk about that and how public schools deprive taxpayers and students of a future that they should be having. This is something Chris and I connected on and is synonymous with a lot of stories that I suspect we're both working on in parallel nationwide on several venues. We're going to come. Hey, Chris, how you doing? You still there?
I am still here. Thank you so much for having me.
Good to have you with us. We're going to have a longer conversation with Chris right after this.
Hi, everybody. I'm Bianca Della Garza, and you have to check out Gene Valentino's GrassRoots TruthCast podcast. I was a guest. He has the best guests always. Check him out.
Relationships matter because people buy people, and that's why I buy Eddie Zarin Insurance of the Zarin Insurance Agency in Pensacola, Florida. A family-owned business with over 50 years in the business, and they treat people the right way. From homeowners insurance to contractors insurance, condo insurance, commercial insurance, all the different coverages that are out there, and of course auto insurance, they've got you covered. They worry about you first. You're more than a policy number. You're a person who they're watching out for, not when the sun is shining, but after the hurricane has left. If you want real service with real savings, contact Eddie Zarin at the Eddie Zarin Insurance Agency. www.zarininsurance.com. Give them a call today. You'll be glad you did when you do. And welcome back to GrassRoots TruthCast. Chris Papst is with me for the next hour or so. We're going to talk about several issues. One of them is the Failure Factory. He's a renowned journalist, and he's out of Baltimore, Maryland, award-winning journalist out of Baltimore, Maryland. He's with Fox 45 there and has done a darn good job at uncovering some things. And I'm going to let him introduce the rest of himself and talk about some of the things you're working on. Welcome aboard, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. So I work for Fox 45 News. I've been here since January of 2017, and I work on a team called Project Baltimore. And what Project Baltimore is it's a team of 5 people. There's 2 photographer editors, 2 producers, and myself as the reporter. And for the past 9 years and 1 month, we've been reporting on one topic. And that one topic is public education. So the reason that we got here, how we got here, and why we're doing this is prior to 2017, I was an investigative reporter working for the ABC News affiliate in Washington, D.C. And the company that I worked for, Sinclair Broadcast Group, came up with this idea to have this Project Baltimore concept of 5 people working on one topic. So I thought that was intriguing, and especially for a journalist to be able to have those type of resources was very intriguing to me. So I moved to Baltimore, and in January of 2017, the topic that we chose was public education. And the reason we chose that topic is because 9 years ago, we could see that Baltimore City Public Schools, according to federal data, was one of the most funded, but one of the lowest performing large school systems in America. And it had been for years, decades, or even generations. And the question that we came in with was, why is this happening? And why is this being allowed to happen? Why are taxpayers putting so much money into public education, specifically in Baltimore, and getting so little results when it comes to student academic outcomes? And 9 years ago, we started in Baltimore City, but since then, we have now we're investigating the counties around Baltimore City and also just pretty much all of Maryland at this point, because what we're seeing, and the reason that I wrote Failure Factory, is because what we're seeing in Baltimore is spreading throughout the entire country, what we can get into during your show here. The the educational concepts, what is happening that has led to that school system being so underperforming, but yet so expensive for so long, is sweeping across the country. And the purpose of Failure Factory was to educate people on what is going on and how we can improve public education.
Well, that's what caught my attention here. What am I misreading your notes? You said you had $1.7 billion of money in your area going to education and only 10% math proficiency as an example. I mean,
Yeah.
is it that disparate?
Well, let's get into it. So the
Okay.
book covers an 8-year period. So it covers 2017 to 2024. Those are 8 school years because you got to count. It's actually 2016 to 2024, those school years. And let's just look at the data. The data is this. In 2017, when Project Baltimore started, Baltimore City Schools had a $1.3 billion budget. In 2024, 8 school years later, it was a $1.7 billion budget. So you're looking at a $400 million increase per year in funding. Comes out to about a 30% increase. Well, what did students get out of that? In 2017, when the book begins, when Failure Factory begins, the graduation rate in Baltimore City was 70%. In 2024, with a $400 million increase a year in funding, the graduation rate was 70%. It didn't change. Math proficiencies in 2017, the math proficiency rate in Baltimore City, this is the entire school system, was 11%. The math proficiency rates in 2024 were 10%. They went down. So 90% of the kids in Baltimore City in 2024 were not proficient in math. And it got worse over those 8 years as taxpayers gave the school system about a 30% increase in funding, $400 million a year. And that, Gene, those are really the questions that we set out to answer. Why is this happening? And I wrote Failure Factory because after doing this for so long, I think we now know why it's happening.
Well, I suspect I need to put a plug in for Failure Factory, and we'll do that in just a second. But are you rushed to judgment and say there's fraud, or is this just an ineptness of government, or is there a social cultural impact going on with illegal immigration? I'm confused as to what's not moving the needle when more money's going into it. And is this consistent with what's going on throughout the nation?
In January of 2017, when I got here, I had already developed a pretty good reputation as an investigative reporter in Washington, D.C. And when I came here, I didn't know anybody. And I'd never been to Baltimore. I literally had never been to Baltimore. And I thought, okay, well, what's this going to be like? So I had a bunch of people reaching out to me. And the people that work in the school system, people that have been in the area for a long time, people who've been here like for 75 years, to younger people who are currently teachers. And the overall theme of what I was hearing was this, that the public education system no longer prioritizes the education of kids. It prioritizes the acquisition of funding and then using that funding to hire adults, which then grows the political power and influence of public education. So I was told that by a number of people in 2017, and I flat out did not believe it. I grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania in a little tiny town. My dad was a woodshop teacher at a public school for 35 years in the teachers union. My brother and I went to public schools K through 12. My kids go to public school. So when I heard that, when I heard people telling me that the public education system does not prioritize educating kids, it prioritizes acquiring funding, I didn't believe it. And if you read Failure Factory, over the 8 years that Failure Factory covers, what you essentially are reading is how my pendulum began to shift. And I went from not believing that at all to thinking, okay, well, it might be true, to the pendulum swinging more, going, people are starting to make some sense, to now I wrote the book because after looking at the data and spending 8 years talking to teachers and parents and students and the administrators that will talk to me, I do now believe that the data show that is absolutely true, that the public education system is not prioritizing the education of kids. That's not to say that some kids don't get educated. I'm saying the priority is not educating kids. The priority is acquiring funding. And I'll just make this last point before we move on. The data that you and I just talked about,
Yeah.
you get 400 million additional dollars a year, and your graduation rate stays the same. Your math proficiencies go down. How else can you explain that other than the focus is on acquiring funding? Because the school systems are very good at acquiring funding. The school system got a 30% increase in funding over 8 years, but the student outcomes either remained the same or got worse. How do you explain that? And what I do in Failure Factory is that that's just one data point or two data points. I go over a lot of data points that reinforce that concept. And when you really look at it, Gene, you can't come to any other conclusion than their energies are put behind acquiring funding. The energies are not put behind educating kids.
Are you sanitizing the truth by the wrong? Are you sanitizing the wrongdoing and not being as accurate as you could be in saying what it really is? Is a perpetration of a fraud against the American taxpayer that has tax dollars being used to promote individual gain, in this case at the expense of the students, as opposed to metrics that show measurement in education and enhancement in education. Now you compare that against foreign nations that have excellent educational systems, and I'm embarrassed. Chris, I'm embarrassed that you had to say that because that's not the America I grew up with in the public school system. My public school system in Connecticut was creme de la creme. I mean, there was no need to think of private school training. I could go on, but would you like to comment about how fraudulent the system is as opposed to anything else?
Well, let's talk about that. So in the 5 years of the book, 5 years of Failure Factory, is an investigation that we did into grade fixing and grade changing. And I don't mean B's to A's or C's to B's. I mean failing grades being changed to passing so students can matriculate through the school system and graduate. That is happening, and that is happening on a large scale. And we prove it with our reporting and prove it through Failure Factory. So here's just a quick timeline of what happened. And then, we can talk about if you think this is fraudulent or not. In 2017, one of the first big stories that Project Baltimore produced is we found that out of the 165 or so schools in Baltimore City, there were 6 that did not have any students test proficient in any subject.
Oh,
So
words.
hundreds of kids, 6 entire schools, not one kid could pass a math or reading state exam. So we do that story and it blows up, as it should. Like that should be an alarming story. And I started getting teachers reaching out to me from Baltimore City schools, and they would say to me, yeah, this is right, but you realize that many of those kids are still graduating. They're getting high school diplomas. And I would say, well, how is that happening? And the teachers would say that an administrator is going into my grade book, changing a failing grade to a passing to matriculate this student through the grades and then give him a diploma.
The
So
administrator is.
the administrator is, not the teachers. The teachers are giving the student the grade they earn, which is a failing grade. The administrators are going in and changing the grade. So I get a number of teachers that are reaching out to me and telling me this. So in November of 2017, I filed a public records request with Baltimore City Public Schools.
Yeah.
And what I requested was documents pertaining to grade changing. So emails, internal investigations, things like that. School system wrote me back and they said, we're not going to give you anything. Go away. So we sued them. In December of 2017, Fox 45 sued Baltimore City Public Schools. In February of 2019, it went to court, and I testified in court for a couple hours in front of a circuit court judge in Baltimore City. And then the judge ruled that Baltimore City schools, and these are the judge's words, willfully and knowingly violated the law by not handing over the documents. What the judge ruled was that
Time
the
out right
schools,
there. That's a crime,
yeah,
is it not?
yeah. So
Isn't that
what?
something that's considered tortious and
Well,
injurious?
it's a violation of state law. Yep.
Yeah.
So the
Okay,
judge
keep going.
ruled that the school system knew that it was breaking the law, but did it anyway to hide potential wrongdoing. So in the book, I give a lot more details about this, but overall, we ended up getting 8,000 emails and many internal investigations that were showing that teachers were writing their administrators, begging them, quit going into my grade book and changing my grade. This student did not pass my class. How did they graduate on Saturday? There's many examples of teachers that were saying what is happening should not be happening. Well, the Inspector General for Education in Maryland, after we sued and won, opened his own investigation. And what he found was that over a 4-year period, there were more than 12,500 failing grades changed to passing in Baltimore City schools,
Wow.
with as many as 10% of kids that were passing who did not earn it. So a state diploma is a state record. And in Baltimore City schools, according to the Inspector General, you had the school system changing failing grades to passing improperly. The student wasn't doing any extra work, and issuing state diplomas to these kids that they did not earn. Now you're asking me about fraud. Does that sound like fraud? Nobody was charged.
No one. Gee.
Nobody.
This may lead to where President Trump suggests the complete abrogation of responsibility and the elimination of the Department of Education at the federal level, and the funding related thereto, and the allowance for chartered school systems or private school systems to emerge. I've heard stories about how the taxpayer dollars used to fund public schools would then have to somehow pivot or transfer over to the taxpayer's pocket to fund the private school system their child is now going to. Not in place yet, I understand, but it's a theory that's, I'm told, imminent because one must precede the other, and the first hasn't occurred yet. They basically look the other way. Why are they looking the other way? Is it that pervasive? Is it so expansive throughout our nation's educational system that it would take down the house of cards?
In last year, about this time last year, President Trump held a speech at the White House where he announced that he signed an executive order to dismantle the U.S. Department of Education. And if you watch that speech that President Trump gave, in that speech, he mentions one school system. He mentions Baltimore, and he mentions my reporting. And what he says is that in 2023, 40% of the high schools in Baltimore City did not have any students test proficient in math. So let that sink in for a second. We already mentioned that the school system's budget's about $1.7 billion that taxpayers are giving it. And nearly half of the high schools could not produce one student who was proficient in math. So that story is in Failure Factory. And I explained to readers how we got that data, how we presented it, that the president talked about it. So when he did that, when President Trump did that, there was outrage all across the country, as there should be. That is alarming. But you hear crickets in Baltimore City. In Baltimore City, what the public officials do is they attacked President Trump. They didn't say the stat isn't correct because it is correct, but they attacked the messenger. And this has been happening for the entire time that I have been doing Project Baltimore, that we report these stories like the 6 schools with no kids proficient, like the violation of state law with not handing over public documents, like the 40% of high schools not proficient in math. All of these reports are in the book. And in all of them, I'm the one who gets attacked, not the school system. So I think your question is, why is that happening?
Yeah.
And why I think that is happening is because Baltimore City is a one-party rule political machine. And this is actually a pretty astounding fact. The only elected Republican that has any jurisdiction over Baltimore is Donald Trump. Every federal and state level and city level elected official that represents Baltimore City is from one political party. Now, I am not suggesting that the Republicans have all the answers, but what I am suggesting is that two-party control is better than one-party rule. Because when you have one-party rule, you have no accountability. There's no checks and balances. And when we report on the things that are happening in Baltimore City that are in Failure Factory, you don't get public officials or elected officials holding the school system accountable. Because in that type of governance, there's no checks and balances.
Okay, two quick rapid fire questions to that point. Number one, was your job ever threatened because of the extent of your reporting being contrary to public appetite and Democratic Party appetite in that area?
Was my job threatened, like by my
Yeah, were
company?
you threatened in any way
Oh
about?
yeah. Oh yeah. I've been physically threatened. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
So I've
okay.
been physically threatened a lot, and I have the emails and the voicemails that I put in Failure Factory. So you can see what people were saying about me. You know, this guy who's coming into Baltimore and simply shining a light on what's going on, and I was being attacked for that. And there were 3 times that we've been doing this that we've had to call the police because the threats went too far, and the police had to go pay a visit to the person making the threats because that certainly it was a thing that happens.
But the crime is so heinous and it's so expansive. Uh, how do you get away with murder forever? I mean, I just don't see how they continue to think that this is okay.
There's no accountability.
Yeah,
There's no checks and balances in the state of Maryland, and that
that's
is how
sad.
you get 70% graduation rates, but yet 10% of your kids are proficient in math. I mean, really try to digest that. You're graduating 70% of your kids, and 90% of them are not proficient in math. That is alarming. And where I'm from and where you're from, if that were the case in my high school, that's a
Yeah.
pitchfork moment. And that is everyone's parents demanding the superintendent be fired, that the principals be fired, that new people come in who are going to improve the quality of education. Because the point of Failure Factory is that over the 8 years that it covers, taxpayers have given that school system $12 billion, and academic outcomes have not improved. And the public officials in Baltimore are completely content with it. They're happy with their school system. They're not demanding that it improve, which is why it's likely not.
Folks, we're talking with Chris Papst, investigative reporter at Fox 45 in Baltimore. What an interesting story. This has turned out to be something that needs to continue. We will continue to bang the drum for you, Chris, on this point because I'm stunned as I continue with these podcasts about how many serious issues are out there nationwide that don't appear in the comforts of certain primetime news stories. Right now, as we speak in February 2026, the wife of the mother of the NBC News journalist Nancy Guthrie is in Tucson, Arizona, still not found after almost 2 weeks of searching. The story is heartfelt, and we certainly wish her the very best and a good outcome. But it sits against a backdrop of stories like this that impact so many more people. You didn't even mention the consequence of passing these students, letting them get a graduation, getting a diploma. They go on to what? College? How, if they got into college, if not on a sports scholarship of some sort, if they got into college with the misrepresentation of the grades and capabilities from the secondary system, uh, you got a college system now having to teach remedial reading and basic math just to get them into the upper college courses that they're trying to get certified in. I don't get how this can be allowed. I'm more bothered by why no one did anything. There's an old saying, failure to defend the rights of other people may someday result in your rights not being defended. Someone should have stepped up sooner and said something to this. Were the teachers who refused to change the grade fired?
Oh, so most of the teachers that speak with us and most of the administrators that speak with us do so under anonymity because they will be fired and they know that. Now, most of the people in the school system, the people that are in the classrooms with the kids, are there for the right reasons. And when they see something is happening that should not be happening, they do want to blow the whistle on it. But they also don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to lose their pensions. They don't want to lose their health care. So what they do is they come to me. They give me information, and oftentimes they'll speak with me and we'll interview them and only use their voice after we background them and make sure that they are who they are. But there's a lot of people that are coming forward and they're telling us what's going on. And we depend on the people on the inside, the teachers, the parents, the students that are coming to us and saying, this is what's really happening in these schools. We interviewed a kid, a student, who missed 120 days of school his senior year and still walked across the stage during graduation.
Oh,
And what happened there was we had a teacher reach out to me and give me transcripts from this school. And we could see in the transcripts that these students were missing, there's 180 days in a school year. Students were missing 120 of them and still graduating. And in one of the transcripts, there was an address. So I went to the address and I knocked on the door. And the student, well, he's not a student anymore. He was 20 years old, unemployed, and it was like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I have all my cameras around me, and he opens the door. I introduce myself, and I start asking him questions about his time in high school. And he even said to me, he's like, people graduated who should not have, but I'm happy that I did graduate, even though he didn't do any extra work to graduate and didn't even feel like he deserved to graduate. But the school system let him walk across the stage anyway. And now he was a 20-year-old guy, unemployed, and really didn't have any interest in finding a job, largely because he didn't have the skills to be able, the math and the reading skills that he needed.
Okay, you're talking about Baltimore, Maryland. Now tell me, how pervasive is this in other, I presume, blue states, blue cities around the nation?
Well, I wrote Failure Factory because this is certainly happening around the country. And what we can see is that public education funding is skyrocketing, but student outcomes are stagnant or getting worse. All the data is telling us this. All the data is telling us this. What Failure Factory is doing, it is getting granular and going into a school system and showing you the details about how and why this is happening and how the focus is not on educating kids, it's on acquiring that funding. Because then you hire the adults, you grow the political influence of the public education system, which then you can acquire more funding because you have more voters and you also have more money within that political machine. And the purpose of Failure Factory is to stop it before it gets too bad. And I make the case in the book that Baltimore is really at the end stages of what a failing public education system does to a community and does to a society.
Yeah.
This is a struggling city. And
so it's an example of what could be seen elsewhere, but it certainly stands out as pretty bad.
Absolutely. Every single year.
Time out for a Failure Factory commercial. Let us find out how we can buy a few of these books. How, when, and where. What's your website?
So my website is chrispapst.com. The book can be bought anywhere books are sold: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Goodreads, your local bookstore. If they don't have it, they can certainly order it. And, I want to keep the conversation going. I wrote the book for people to read and to understand what's happening and get involved, and don't let this happen to your school system. Don't let your school system become like a Baltimore City.
And the data in the book takes us up to what, about 2024?
2024 to 2025. Yeah.
Okay, so since the book was written and published, what have you seen a transition? Any pivot on better numbers since then?
No. Well, that's the
So the
concept.
so the message got out. The
Mhm.
bad, the revelation came out to the public, showing what's transpired in Baltimore, and in from Baltimore's perspective of educational operation, there's been no improvement or betterment.
Well, keep in mind that I've been doing this for 9 years. So
Yeah, but
everything,
I
yeah,
meant
everything is,
since you brought it out.
yeah. So the
Have,
book came out just a couple months ago, the end of 2025.
okay,
And since then, we have received the 2025 data, test scores,
okay,
funding.
that's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. So the school
Anything looking
system,
better?
well, let's talk about it. So the school system, we mentioned, had a $1.7 billion budget in 24. In
Right.
25, the budget went up $100 million.
Oh,
So it now has a $1.8 billion budget. The graduation rate went up 1 point. It went to 71%. So over 8 years, over the 9 years now, the school system got 500 million additional dollars and the graduation rate went up 1%. But one of the main themes of Project Baltimore, and this is extremely important, is how the academic standards are being lowered and how many people would call it dumbing down education. And
yeah.
I'll give you an example of what happened in Maryland. And what I do in Failure Factory is I give people examples of things to look for in their local school systems that are indicative of there being some significant problems. So in 2020, and this had nothing to do with COVID, by the way. This was before COVID. Early 2020, the politicians in Maryland wanted graduation rates to go up. Now, most people listening to us right now would say, okay, well, the best way to do that is to better educate the kids. Well, that's not what Maryland did. What Maryland did was they made it easier to graduate from high school. They changed the graduation requirements. So in 2019, that graduating class, they had to do three things to graduate. They needed 75 service hours, 21 course credits, and they had to pass state assessments, state proficiency assessments to prove that when you graduate from high school, you are proficient in things like math and reading. Well, starting in 2020, the state did away with the assessments. Students no longer have to pass state assessments to graduate from high school. In other words, students no longer have to prove that they're proficient in math and reading to get a Maryland high school diploma. And the reason the state did this was to increase graduation rates. So even with that and $500 million of additional funding, graduation rates in Baltimore City are only up 1%.
If it's only up 1%, where did the money go?
So the money mostly goes to salaries, pensions, and benefits. That's where most of your money is going. Now, as far as the employees that are in the school system, over the 8 years that Failure Factory covers, the $400 million that we talked about for the increase in funding, the school system hired 1,300 additional employees. You know how many of them were teachers? None.
None, I was going to say. Yeah.
Not one. The school
Maybe
system
athletic
in
coaches, but not teachers, huh?
The school system in 2017 had the same number of teachers that it had in 2024, and they hired 1,300 additional employees. So who are the employees? Well, I have all this laid out in Failure Factory. You can see it for yourself. And all this data comes from the Maryland State Department of Education. It's director level positions, it's central office positions, it's positions like that. That's where a majority, in this case, all of the funding is going. It's not getting to the classroom. And Gene, it goes back to what we talked about. The focus is not educating the kids.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not. It's well, when you have a government system that's not serving the people it represents, if you have an educational agency or department of government that intends to educate and is not proving to educate, then the citizens who are paying the taxes and who are hiring through elections, hiring these people, should be sending a message. If they're not reforming, are they part and parcel of the crime? I mean, would you be willing to stick around like many people do in Minneapolis and run outside events and daycare centers and social service outreach groups that are really funded from the same mysterious money? Uh, and therefore, if I'm going to work in that environment, I best keep my mouth shut on some of this extra money coming in. Not knowing what your investigative reporting actually found, I'm going to say that I'm not too far off in my opinion. Why would so many people that just got hired not recognize the error of the way?
As far as the people in Baltimore's voting, and this is something that after 9 years of looking at I still really haven't allowed myself an answer that I find acceptable, but I can tell you that what goes through my brain. So in Baltimore City, there has not been an elected Republican in city council since 1930s. There has not been a Republican elected mayor in Baltimore since the 1960s. So those are the main political powers in Baltimore City that are local. And you're talking about generation and generation and generation and generation of people voting the same way. And we're not seeing that change. But and this is what's confusing to me to a degree. I'm not saying that they necessarily have to vote for Republicans, but they have to vote for people that are willing to hold the school system accountable. And that's who's not getting into office. And what confuses me about it is that in the book, I talk to a lot of parents. I go to their homes. I'm sitting in their family rooms with them. I'm looking into their eyes and I'm spending time with them. And every single one of them wants something better for their kids. And every single one of them wants a better school system. But they all feel so defeated and they feel beaten down and they feel like their votes don't matter. And that's the problem. It's been like this for so long that many of them have lost hope and they don't think that it can change. And I think it can. I
Yeah.
wrote Failure Factory because I do believe that it can change, but it's going to have to come from those people, those parents.
Yeah, this is not to me a Republican Democrat issue. And I don't want to get into the Donald Trump thing. I just want to make an observation. If the people see it's not working, why would you tolerate more of the same? Look, I don't care if you like Donald Trump or not. If he comes out and supports a remedy to fix this problem, you get behind the guy. I don't care if you like him. Get behind the guy because he's supporting this cure or this revelation that needs to be addressed at the very least. I don't understand the people. While I'm quick to blame government and bad actors in government, and quite frankly, they're there, and they put up a Marxist socialistic threat that you best keep your mouth shut and just go along. And I get the sense that that's the kind of parent that's spooked by trying to make waves and try to change things. But doing nothing is not an option. When it hits home and it affects your children, you're going to let the kid continue to be psychologically beaten down and ill-educated. I don't understand why parents have not stepped up to do something. You can't keep blaming the political leader if you keep voting the bad actors back in.
In Baltimore City, one of the problems that a lot of people have is that the school board is mostly not elected. The school board is appointed by the mayor.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
there are 12 members of the school board, and 2 of them are elected by the people. And that just started, Gene, 2.5 years ago. The first ever elected school board members in Baltimore City was 2.5 years ago. So this is a machine that is not accountable to the voter. and is not accountable to the taxpayer and the parent because they get in there through other means. So how do they get in? Well, they're appointed by the mayor. So when people vote for the mayor is going to decide who's on the school board. So in the last election that Baltimore had 2 years ago, you had about 6 people that were running for mayor in the Democratic primary. And that's all that matters is the Democratic primary. Like
Right.
that's the general election for all intents and purposes. 4 of them wanted to replace the CEO. They said, we need a new direction in our school system. It's not working. One of them, who was the incumbent, said, I like the CEO. I like where our school system is. I support the current superintendent of Baltimore City Schools. And that's the person who won. So that person wins, goes into the mayor's office, and now there's not any change in Baltimore City Public Schools from a leadership perspective because the only person who has the control is the mayor. And so people in Baltimore City only have one person to vote for, one elected office to vote for that controls the finances of the city and the school board and a majority of the school board. So I do think from a democratic perspective, the system is not set up in a way for people to be able to have their voices heard.
And this is one of my concerns about transitioning off federal to everything local, because some of the local governances or rules of government are not good at all. I come out of New England, and you are correct. It would be 1 or 2 leaders in government appointing the school board and or the police commission, and they honor these people with appointed positions, but they didn't necessarily have subject matter expertise on that topic to be on that board in the first place. In fact, it was a thank you or it was a thank you of sorts to people who worked on their campaign, as you know. So again, I say, now, by the way, that concept of appointing a board member is mostly in New England or the Northeast. I'm down in Florida now, and you're electing everything all the way down to the darn dog catcher. You elect the school board, you elect everybody. You elect a tax collector, and I don't know what's the platform when you run for tax collector? I'm going to raise your taxes. My platform is I'm going to raise your taxes more efficiently. I don't know. How do you run with that? But in the case, I'm joking. In the case you just mentioned, this is a serious issue so what's the solution? I don't want to give the solution away from your book, Failure Factory, if it's in it. But where do you go from here? You described the problem. Now, what's the solution?
So the book does go over a lot of solutions. And I think that it would be a failure on my part if I did 8 years of investigating the school system and everything that's wrong and not provide solutions. But the solutions aren't coming from me. They're coming from the people inside the school system that are living this every day, who know what the solutions are, but they're not happening because the status quo is very profitable. And if you're someone who's profiting off the status quo, you're likely not going to want to change it. So we can just kind of go over this quickly. So there's 2 avenues here for changes. There's the policy changes in the classroom, and there's the political changes outside of the classroom. And the political changes we already largely went over. You have to vote for people that are going to hold the school system accountable. And the other thing that's really important is in most of the country, you do elect your school board members. But most people sort of see school boards as, it's not that interesting. Most people want to vote in the presidential election. But I would argue that your school board, unless you're in the military, is probably more impactful on your life than the president, because the quality of your local education affects your home values, it affects your taxes, it affects your crime rates, and it affects your business. Because if your companies can't hire good local people because they're undereducated, that's going to affect your economy. And all of that goes back to your local school boards. So we have to put a lot of energy into who's in our local school boards. From a policy perspective, one of the main things, and there's a number of things in Failure Factory we talk about, but one of the main things to fix the schools now is something that wouldn't cost any additional money and wouldn't be that hard to do. And that is simply, you have to hold the students accountable for their actions. And about 10, 15 years ago, we took this turn in America where we decided that we were not going to hold students accountable and that they could misbehave in school and we were going to keep them in school. We weren't going to discipline them. And if a kid is acting out in a class and the teacher sends them to the principal's office, the kid's right back in the class the next period. That is so problematic. And when you talk to teachers, that is one of the main barriers to education, is that we have this mindset now in America where we are not holding the students accountable for their actions. That has to change. And that could happen tomorrow and have a huge impact.
Well, the ripple effect to that is you just demoralized the teacher who sees this punk coming back into the classroom with hardly being admonished by the principal or whoever, and now she or he is stuck again with this bad behaving student, and you going home every day after a year of that'd probably drive anybody crazy. Is it that kind of lack of discipline that's not being addressed? I mean, I remember I never went to the principal because the teacher in the classroom jumped on me pretty hard and didn't have to send me to the principal. You know, the admonishment.
That doesn't happen anymore.
It doesn't happen anymore.
Teachers' authority in the classroom has largely been stripped of them. They're not given the authority to discipline students. They're not given the authority to hold the students accountable anymore. And we're seeing a massive teacher shortage in America. And it's not because people don't want to help kids and teach. It's because of the environment in which we have created in our public schools. And the other thing is, Gene, it's not about money. I have never had a teacher tell me they don't make enough money. You know why? Because you know exactly how much money you're going to make when you become a teacher. There's no surprises. It's all right there in the union contract. So to become a teacher and then complain about how much money you make is disingenuous because you knew what the contract was going in. And I've never had a teacher tell me they don't make enough money. What they tell me is they don't have enough authority in their classrooms. They're being pigeonholed. They are being micromanaged. They're being told how to teach instead of using their own experiences in the classroom to teach kids. It's a huge problem. And the problem isn't created by the teacher. The problem is created by the administration that has developed this environment in schools in which teachers don't want to be.
But it is money. It's the environment at the global level with the elected officials that have raised taxes, increased education costs, and with little or nothing to show for it. And someone's getting that money. And that's what's that?
Well, that's exactly. That's what we started your show with. The focus is on money. All these decisions are being made because of money.
Not teacher compensation money. I'm talking the revenue coming in from the taxpayer that is only a small portion of which seems to be teacher compensation. There's something bigger and grander going here at the political level that has been perverted. And I think that's your next news story, is catching those wrongdoers blind, because you've laid it out so well. Folks, we're talking with Chris Papst. He's an investigative reporter, formerly with CBS, NBC, ABC, and now with the Fox affiliate, Fox 45 out of Baltimore. Great guy to have Chris Papst with us here today. Chris, another plug, please, before we close. Where do I get the Failure Factory?
You can get it on Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Goodreads, wherever books are sold. And I really hope that people read the book and reach out to me, and that the conversation I'm having with you is the conversation I want to continue having, because we got to fix our public schools. We all know that, and I think Failure Factory lays out the pathway to do that. And I'm really easy to find on X. I'm just Chris Papst, ChrisPapst. Facebook, Chris Papst, chrispapst.com. Please pick up a copy of the book. Let me know what you think, and let's make America better.
And folks, I'm going to put a graphic up on my website as well, so you can catch it there, if not through Chris. I'm Gene Valentino, GeneValentino.com, the GrassRoots TruthCast. .com. Go there. Oh, please subscribe. You can watch this episode along with many of the others we do each week here from the GrassRoots TruthCast. We send them out weekly. Some are by radio shows, some are with the Newsmax affiliation I have, and the others are general individual podcasts like I'm doing today with Chris. Chris, any final thoughts or comments you'd like to make?
No, just thank you so much for having me on, and I hope the people learned some stuff from this show, and that they can take something away from it. And we can't allow more Baltimore City Public Schools throughout America. We have to stop it, and we can stop it before it happens. But as I said, it's going down that way, so we got to stop it soon.
The beauty of America is that America allows for people like you, the grassroots, to step up and step out and bring these issues front and center, revealing the good points and our warts and pimples at times. But you're doing that, and that's what makes America so great, really, is that, and this is what the kids ought to be learning in school, is that we're a self-deprecating nation. The people criticize themselves and look inwardly at the nature of our operation, and we're quite critical of it, unlike most other nations of the world, which you'll never see that kind of self-deprecation coming from autocratic controls. We're the oldest nation this year, Chris, 250 years. It's a big time for America. God willing, we get 250 years more. And we will, folks, with people like you buying Chris's book and realizing his issue with education in Baltimore described mirrors what's going on throughout the nation. And it's your job and mine. We can't be pointing the finger at anyone else. It's your job and mine to help Chris and thousands of people like him who are trying to do the right thing and bringing issues like this forward to the nation so that we can fix ourselves from within. We got corrupted from within. Now let's fix ourselves from within, politics aside. Thank you, Chris Papst, for joining us here today.
Thank you.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us on another episode of Gene Valentino's GrassRoots TruthCast. Go to the site, www.genevalentino.com. Please subscribe, and we'll push these episodes out to you weekly. You'll also find them on all the social media platforms as well. Thank you again for another episode on Gene Valentino's GrassRoots TruthCast. See you soon. Relationships matter because people buy people, and that's why I buy Eddie Zarin Insurance of the Zarin Insurance Agency in Pensacola, Florida. A family-owned business with over 50 years in the business, and they treat people the right way. From homeowners insurance to contractors insurance, condo insurance, commercial insurance, all the different coverages that are out there, and of course auto insurance, they've got you covered. They worry about you first. You're more than a policy number. You're a person who they're watching out for, not when the sun is shining, but after the hurricane has left. If you want real service with real savings, contact Eddie Zarin at the Eddie Zarin Insurance Agency. www.zarininsurance.com. Give them a call today. You'll be glad you did when you do.